We have a consumer alert tonight. GM is recalling nearly 600,000 full-size U.S. trucks and SUVs.
A recall alert has shaken anyone driving a GM pickup or SUV. General Motors has announced the recall of more than 800,000 vehicles, 2021 through 2024 Chevy Silverados, GMC Sierras, and several full-size SUVs. To many, it seemed to come out of nowhere. Trucks marketed as the most dependable in America, suddenly revealed as vulnerable, unreliable, even dangerous. The company admits that the V8 engines can fail without warning, putting families at risk every time they get behind the wheel. This year alone, regulators forced GM to recall nearly 900,000 trucks and SUVs after catastrophic failures blindsided drivers across the country. But the commercials never mentioned this. These engines were flawed from day one. Executives knew it. This story isn't about vehicles. It's about survival. It's about the courtroom revelations that expose what executives buried. And it's about whether this scandal will grow large enough to threaten the empire GM built. Because by the time the full picture comes into view, you'll realize this isn't just GM's problem. It's America's problem. When the recall was first announced, the illusion of invincibility cracked. On paper, a recall notice looks like red tape, a service appointment, an inconvenience. But in real life, it means something very different. Imagine you're on the interstate, family strapped in, music on the radio. Suddenly, without warning, the engine locks. Steering stiffens, brakes go soft, and in your rearview mirror, an 18-wheeler barrels forward at full speed. That's not an inconvenience. That's terror. For decades, GM promised continuity. A Silverado parked in the driveway was meant to be as reliable as the one your father drove. Suddenly, that promise is gone. The family truck that symbolized security is now a rolling gamble. Buyers who thought they purchased safety found themselves locked inside machines capable of betraying them at 65 miles per hour. No commercial can soften the image of a family stranded on the shoulder, traffic screaming past, hopes shaken. And yet the outrage only deepened when customers discovered GM's official fix. Instead of replacing the defective parts or redesigning the engines, GM's solution was an oil swap. Drain the factory 0W20, pour in heavier 0W40, and slap on a new filler cap. That was it. A terrifying failure that could end lives was met with instructions that sounded more like a do-it-yourself tip than a recall. On the surface, the remedy sounded technical. Thicker oil forms a stronger film, reducing friction. But beneath the jargon, the truth was undeniable. This was a band-aid for a bullet wound. The thicker oil hurt fuel economy, dragging down the very mileage numbers GM had used to sell these trucks as best in class. Even worse, engineers privately admitted no oil on Earth could fix engines already circulating microscopic metal shards through their blocks. Once bearings were scarred, no change in viscosity could undo the damage. The so-called fix merely bought time, stretching engines just long enough to limp past their warranty period. For customers, the plastic oil cap felt less like protection and more like a countdown clock. Imagine spending tens of thousands of dollars on a brand new truck, only to be handed a filler cap and told to trust it. Anger mounted, and so did suspicion. If this was the solution, what did GM truly know about the depth of the defect? Numbers began to tell the story. By January 2025, federal regulators had logged more than 40 detailed complaints of sudden engine failure. Families described losing power at highway speeds. Others reported crashes. A dozen people were injured. Investigators believed the real number was higher. The timeline of escalation was brutal. In January, regulators opened a preliminary probe. By April, after reviewing mounting complaints and bulletins, they expanded the investigation to nearly 900,000 vehicles. Within weeks, GM was forced to issue a stop sale order and launch the recall. That kind of speed is rare, and it signaled how overwhelming the evidence had become. Even more damning, failures clustered in trucks with fewer than 30,000 miles. These weren't old workhorses at the end of their lives. They were practically new machines, bought with pride and expectation. In glossy ads, the Silverado was indestructible. In government records, it was a hazard. And this wasn't the first time. Back in 2022, GM faced a class action lawsuit over oil consumption defects. Customers testified that their trucks burned a quart of oil every 1,000 miles. Engineers had flagged flawed piston ring designs years earlier. But instead of redesigning the part, executives authorized a cheaper cleaning process, gambling the engines would survive long enough to pass warranty coverage. The jury saw through it. Damages soared into the hundreds of millions. That case established a devastating pattern. Engineers raised alarms, executives ignored them, and customers paid the price. The recall of nearly 1 million trucks didn't arrive in a vacuum. It arrived in the shadow of that courtroom. The most chilling detail of this scandal lies not in explosions or dramatic failures, but in microscopic flaws. At GM's St. Catharines plant in Ontario, crankshafts and connecting rods were produced with machining errors so slight they were invisible to the naked eye. Thousandths of an inch, thinner than a strand of hair. Yet those errors were enough to collapse the oil film separating moving metal parts. When that film collapsed, bearings scarred, rods seized, and engines tore themselves apart. Oil pans glimmered with metallic debris. And it didn't take 200,000 miles. Many failures struck under 30,000. What makes this horror sink deeper is its randomness. A driver cannot predict when their engine will freeze. On an uphill climb in city traffic or mid-commute, the failure comes without warning. To realize that the fate of a $60,000 truck depends on a flaw invisible to the eye is to grasp how fragile trust has become. And yet, across the same company, another vehicle thrives untouched. The Corvette paradox. The Chevrolet Corvette shares the small block family of these defective trucks. But while Silverado owners watch engines seize, Corvette drivers push 6,000 RPM on racetracks without fear. Why? Because for the Corvette, GM spares no expense. Forged steel rods, premium alloy crankshafts, a dry sump lubrication system. Proof that GM knows how to build indestructible engines. It simply chooses not to for working families. That contrast fuels resentment. For Corvette buyers, often wealthier customers, GM delivers perfection. For working families relying on pickups for jobs, school, and safety, GM delivers cost-cut corners. The same company, the same heritage, two radically different fates. The Corvette stands as both a triumph and an indictment, proof that reliability is a matter of choice, not technology. And behind it all lurks the cold arithmetic of what insiders call the warranty clock. A full redesign of flawed parts costs billions. Telling owners to pour in thicker oil costs pennies. If that buys another 10,000 miles, many engines will outlast their warranty coverage. Failures that occur later? That's on the customer. Court documents from earlier cases show executives openly weighing whether patches could delay failures long enough to shift costs. The warranty clock isn't a safeguard, it's a trap. Dealerships became the face of the fallout. Almost overnight, service bays turned chaotic. Mechanics trained for oil changes and brake jobs now faced seized engines. Phones rang nonstop. Service advisors tried to explain fixes they didn't trust. Showrooms froze under stop-sale orders, customers demanding refunds, salespeople accused of pushing defective trucks they themselves hadn't been warned about. Community trust shattered. Regulators pressed harder. The investigation escalated to a full engineering analysis. Why weren't defects caught sooner? Why was the fix limited to thicker oil? Lawsuits multiplied. Attorneys filed class actions alleging negligence and concealment. Internal memos suggested executives knew of machining flaws years earlier. Exposure soared into the billions. Investors flinched. And on the factory floor, pride turned to shame. Workers who had spent careers building the most dependable trucks now avoided conversations about their jobs. Union leaders debated making safety itself a bargaining chip. For some, the betrayal was personal, tightening bolts on engines they feared would strand families. Meanwhile, rivals pounced. Ford plastered highways with conquest offers. Toyota leaned on its reputation for reliability. Ram sweetened deals with long warranties and free maintenance. Loyalty in the truck market is famously sticky, but once it breaks, it rarely returns. Competitors understood that. Politics soon followed. Hearings were drafted. Senators prepared sound bites. Executives were prepped for cameras and hostile questions. Insurance actuaries recalculated risk, raising premiums on affected V8 models. Families who had done nothing wrong paid more, not for mistakes behind the wheel, but for defects hidden in the block. And while executives scrambled, drivers took control. Forums filled with VIN lookups, maintenance logs, and oil analysis reports. Owners documented rattles, stalls, and breakdowns with the precision of auditors. Advocacy groups organized petitions, demanded buybacks, and taught neighbors how to preserve evidence. A driver once isolated became one of thousands, and thousands became pressure. Engines have failed, trust has collapsed, lawsuits are building, and the fallout is only starting. Subscribe now because the next chapter of this scandal will be even harder for GM to hide.